Uh, just want to share a few thoughts about the gospel and what that means for us, because when a church celebrates its name day, and it's we do that, of course, in the Orthodox tradition, but what we're supposed to be celebrating is what God has done with us as a community, what God has done to manifest His grace. And churches are named often in honor of a saint or an event, the life of Christ, or even the Virgin Mary. And ours happens to be St. Matthew, and I always love the story of how this came about, because how God works in spite of things sometimes, not only with us, but sometimes in spite of us. Until about 6 years ago, this was the only parish named in honor of St. Matthew's in the whole Greek Archdiocese. About 6 years ago, a new mission started out west. But in the meantime, how did this come to be? And I remember when I first got here, people were saying, look, Father, we're the only St. Matthew's in the whole GOA, and so on and so forth. But the way it came about was when the two groups kind of split 50 plus years ago in Reading, they wanted to buy a building. And what was for sale was an old Lutheran church that was built in around 1892. And it happened to be named St. Matthew's. So rather than fight about what they're going to name the church, they said, that sounds good. But here's the irony of it in a neat way, was St. Matthew's Lutheran Church was the first Lutheran church in Reading to start doing services all in English instead of German or Swedish. And this is back in the earlier in the 19th century. They had a heart to begin with to reach out to the community around them, not just be a church for themselves. And of course, many of our parishes made up of immigrants, and they huddled together, and it was a place to be safe, especially when you think of some of the places out here where the Ku Klux Klan were very present. If you were not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, you definitely usually couldn't get a job in management of some kind. It was very, very hard. So the parishes were a safe place. But now, of course, things have changed, but the reality is, of course, church is not about being safe. It's not about being safe. Father Tim talked about that last night in the Vespers, and that way Father Tim Hojnicki, whose church happens to be the Holy Apostles, the 12. And, you know, real Christianity is actually very dangerous. It's the message of the gospel is one that shakes people up. It shakes people up. The idea of a gospel that gets under one's skin, that challenges all kinds of things that would, like he said last night, of course, in 2.5 centuries brought the Roman Empire down to its knees, from a bunch of fishermen, tax collectors, and so forth. And learning now that what does this mean as far as being a church and so forth. It's not just picking a name that we like, the biggest donor, the church is named after the biggest donor, or whoever the biggest donor wants, blah, blah, blah. But what are the meanings behind all this when a church is named something? And what's fascinating about Matthew is definitely somebody who's marginalized, as we know. He was a tax collector. We have to keep in mind what that meant to the Jewish people back then. A tax collector was somebody who worked for the Romans, and we have to remember the Jews saw the Romans the way, for instance, the Greeks during World War II saw the Nazis. You had one of your own people working for the oppressor. And a tax collector was obligated to get the tax for the Romans, and if you didn't pay the tax, he would rat on you, and the Romans could come and take away your family, enslave them, do whatever, take away your house, your property, and so forth. So not only was this tax collector working for the Romans and trying to get and squeeze tax money out of you, he also would get a little commission on the side, tijera, which made it worse as far as reputation. And tax collectors were really, you talk about the bottom end of the totem pole as far as the way people viewed different kinds of professions and lifestyles and so forth. So here's Matthew at his tax booth, struggling with all this and probably knowing he's hated and so on and so forth. And he's heard, I'm sure, about this rabbi from Nazareth, who's now living in Capernaum, which is apparently where this all took place. In a sense, Jesus has made Capernaum his headquarters. That's where Peter lived and had his fishing business with Andrew, his brother, and James and John, and Zebedee, James and John's dad, and so forth. And I'm sure Jesus heard all the stories about the rotten, lousy tax collectors and a lot of other epithets that went with that and language that kids weren't supposed to hear. And Jesus stops and says, Matthew, I want you to follow me. Come with me. And in the gospel, the word is not he gets up. It's anastas. Something resurrected in Matthew. Something resurrected that was dead in Matthew. He came to life, in other words. He came to life. And he was so touched by the fact of God's love being embodied and manifest in this young rabbi, and would learn, of course, more of the identity of this young rabbi as time went along. That not only was he Messiah, but what Messiah meant, that it would be that God is fully present here with us. With us, not away, like some of these old songs. Oh, the Lord above, as if he's in another galaxy, but the Lord with us. Father Tim pointed out that, the gospel begins quoting the prophet Isaiah, that the child that would be born of the Virgin Mary is Immanuel, which means God with us. And at the end of the gospel, when Jesus is ascending, he says to the disciples, I am with you to the end of the world. God with us. But God with us, not just so we can be happy and just sit around and go, oh, God's with us, but to partner with God in his project of wanting to redeem the world that he created, whose development got stunted in the sin of Adam and Eve, and that we've inherited that stunting. Like we know this when a child is traumatized, either through abuse or somebody starts doing drugs or alcohol, addictive behaviors at maybe 10, 11 years old, they emotionally stay that age. And the reality is Adam and Eve's sin is the fact that the human race is stunted spiritually. So no matter what technological advances we may develop as human beings, we are like, and I know this, being at the jails, and actually you don't have to be at the jails, it's other places, even sometimes in our own parishes, and you look around us in the country, people in leadership who act, no matter how many degrees they may have, they act like they're 10, 12, or 14 years old. And God comes embodying himself in the person of Jesus to take where Adam and Eve left off and to actually take from the beginning, even from the very act of conception and birth all the way through, to grow the humanity that now he has joined himself to and been joined to. That all our DNA is now taken into Jesus himself, to circulate, to heal the humanity that is so broken and traumatized. And what he's calling disciples, and the word disciple in the ancient Greek world, that word omathitas, was not just simply a student who's taking some classes and he passes a test, and like many of us, we forget what we learned in high school. We may have aced the course, but years later, can I do trigonometry anymore? This kind of thing. But to be an apprentice, that's what the word meant, to be a hands-on, to learn to do what your teacher does, to work on his project and become as adept on that project as your teacher is. That's a pretty big deal. And so he's asking a tax collector, the lowest on the totem pole, to partner with him in this incredible act of redemption, of healing, of birthing the resurrected life of God that would come about, of course, in Jesus' death and resurrection, and be completed in Pentecost. And let me just make a little rabbit trail just for a quick second to say that, in the church we celebrate the, Holy Week, it's a big thing, and the Anastasi, the resurrection of Christ, it's a big thing, and then we stop. And we don't realize that that's not the goal. Christ inaugurated something, but the goal was to get to Pentecost. And Pentecost is when the Spirit is poured out to touch all of us, to be extended, actual, direct presence of Jesus on earth as in heaven, physically, on earth, to keep partnering with him. In other words, Pentecost isn't like happy birthday to the church and let's have fun and a party. It's now, no, it's time to get to work and be working with Jesus and being trained by him and working with him and bringing that redemptive love to the world around us. And it's not, it's not because our backgrounds are perfect. I mean, I love this about, there's many saints in the life of the church like this. They had what you would call dubious backgrounds, dubious lifestyles that would not have been seen as necessarily in sync with the gospel. They struggled with a lot of other issues. But they came to the Lord, and the Lord brought them, and this is something that's very powerful, because when Jesus calls Matthew, he brings him into a community. He just doesn't bring him to himself. There's already disciples with Jesus. There's already a sense of community, and that community is what manifests the environment that allows healing and growth and apprenticeship to take place in. The church is not just a place to do these nice rituals, and again, the thing that we see, like in our consumer world, that you go shopping for your sacraments. I need a wedding this week, Father. We want to baptize our child, Father, and we come get these things, but then there's no idea of transformation and healing and what this all means. And the fact that if I baptize my child, for example, I'm committing to growing that child to be an apprentice of Jesus himself, to be in a partnership, not just, isn't it nice we baptize the baby? Or when there's a wedding. Marriage in the church is not just two people who like each other, attracted to each other, whose hormones are flying crazy or whatever. It is these two are coming into a partnership with Christ. A partnership, a living, breathing partnership with God. That's why when they go around the table 3 times, it's the same 3 hymns that when somebody's ordained a deacon, a priest, or a bishop. Partnership. We get married believe it or not, for our salvation. That's God's mind when we get married. As apprentices. I mean, even some of the prayers, again, forgive the little rabbit trail, even the prayers are talking about the couple working with Christ to share him, that even in the material goods that God will bless them with, that they may share with others who are in need. It's not just so we can have the big house and the 3 cars and the summer home and maybe, blah, 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 blah. It is that we're given these things to share, to be with Christ, partnering him for the redemption and healing of the world. And it means a lot of times then that we understand that this gift is given to us not because we deserve it, but because we're loved. We're loved because in partnering with Christ, we grow in what it means to be fully human, to grow out of the traumatized condition of stunted development and growth spiritually in other ways and so forth. And to be in an environment that heals and invites people who have been traumatized or hurt, who are not perfect, who have even some serious sins, but here is the place they can be healed. Here's the place they can be rooted. I remember one time Father Tom Hopko at seminary, they were talking about all the struggles of people and people who do bad things out in the world. You have people who do drugs. You have people who commit adultery, people who do this, do that, and so on and so forth. And the way the church acts is like, we don't want those kind of people. But Father Tom goes, if you listen to Jesus, that's who he wants in the church. And so we look at St. Matthew, this incredible figure, and again, and Father Tim did a good job last night because he talked about the 12. You talk about disparate personalities. I mean, you got a guy working for the Romans, right? Who would get gratuities and commissions off of, squeezing, the financial means of his fellow Jewish people. And then you got Simon the Zealot, who's basically ISIS, that anybody who's not honoring God the way he should be killed. Imagine these guys all together. It must have made meal times and other things interesting. And I laugh thinking because back then, one of the sports they did play, by the way, was rugby. So maybe they let their tensions out on each other when they're playing rugby, like the precursor of football. But But I think so powerful that in Jesus, all these people are brought together. All these people are brought together. So what are we celebrating then? I believe with Matthew's prayers that we are and need to continue to be and grow in the fact that this is a church that invites everyone who wants Christ, no matter what their background is. Not just whether they're Greek or not. I know for some people that was a big hurdle, but this is far beyond that. This is far beyond that. That we really mean what we say when we talk about being a place, like some of the fathers talk about, this is a hospital. As long as people are willing to do the work, that we will dovetail, will be an environment that works with and even dovetails with other means of healing for people. You know, in the past, we brought somebody to talk about the 12-step program. We've talked about other kinds of issues. How do we can be more supportive of people that struggle? This is not the church for perfect people. We're all frail. I mean, Jesus' comment about it's not the righteous who need the physician, but those who are ill. He's being sarcastic because everyone needs Christ. Everyone needs Christ. But I think Matthew is praying for us to understand the invitation we're being given constantly, that we're renewing. It's kind of like, you know, like in a marriage, you might renew your vows, you renew your love for each other. And it is, because real life is this. Real life is this. Real marriage is this. Real Christianity is this. You know, Paul's letter today about what an apostle goes through. He's writing to other Christians, and we're being treated as trash. And the irony, he's writing to a church that some of the people in that church were treating him as trash. And yet. And he's not dependent on how perfectly things look. One of the things I think about with many of the apostles as they're being, about to be executed, and Matthew actually even got down, according to tradition, he even got down to Ethiopia. He was kind of running around for a while. God bless him. But I think about, like where St. Paul was, and I'm sure like Matthew was this, because when these guys were arrested and tried and to be executed, it didn't look good, and did not only not look good for them, but what would happen to the other Christians who made up the church in those local areas that they were in. When Paul is executed, Nero is fully persecuting the church in Rome. The church is being decimated. The churches he established, many of them, they're arguing amongst each other. It's a very frail movement, this thing called the followers of Jesus, the way as it was called at the time. The apostles didn't live to see the full fruition, but they were faithful because they understood who Christ was and what they'd been invited to. They had a rabbi who was crucified too. But what came after, or came with the crucifixion, was this incredible explosion that transforms the world, that brought the kingdom of God onto earth. And now, because of Pentecost, we can now be actually integrated into that. So I pray that we learn from this and honor the memory of somebody like Matthew, the tax collector, quote unquote, the guy that was on the bottom of the totem pole. And that we be the kind of churches that Christ is so clearly seen, that whoever really wants Christ and wants to receive healing in order to partner with Christ, not just to get better so I can have a better job, not against that or this and that and the other thing, but so that I can grow in what it means to be human and grow in that partnership and serving Christ and partnering with him for the sake and life of the world, like we say in the liturgy every Eucharist. That's what we gather for, to thank God for that, to thank God for Jesus and what he's done through his death and resurrection, and to thank God that we can now be part of that, now, not just after we die, now. Okay. God bless all of you and all of us.